Just trying to figure out how to describe someone like Aaron Imholte to a general audience, somebody that hasn't come across him on the internet, is a real challenge. He's very polarizing and himself a polarized figure. He's very at odds and in conflict with himself. And the most interesting thing to me is not so much his show or anything that he talks about necessarily, but watching him try to grapple with the conflict within himself and somehow make his way in the world while lying constantly to himself and everyone else. His show is called the Steel Toe Morning Show, and he broadcasts it on the internet constantly, but like every morning and most afternoons, actually. And there's really not like a format or structure or a typical topics that come up with the show that I can easily relate, other than a few niche things that we'll get into here. He just sort of bounces from thing to thing and is sort of broadcasting himself into total exhaustion and delusion. But if there's one unifying principle of his show at all, it's that he is constantly begging for money, for donos from his listeners. So Aaron was a wildly obscure internet radio guy until around a year ago. I think I'm describing him as an internet radio guy because he was a radio guy in like a tiny market in Minnesota for some years, and that's where he cut his teeth, I guess. And so he takes like a lot of like the worst things about radio. I've mentioned many times on this channel that I'm a big fan of the audio format and radio shows, good radio shows in general, but there are some tropes and hacky things about radio, especially like the morning zoo radio tropes, like the fake voice and the horns and bells and all that sort of stuff.
Hey, wait a minute, Monkey Mania is going crazy throughout the Delaware Valley, and you still have a chance to get tickets. Just watch the Monkeys weeknight at 5 and listen to the zoo every day and answer the trivia question.
And so he's like that end of the radio spectrum, like the cheesy schlock morning zoo end. And he sort of emerged from that total obscurity through a liaison with a more prominent internet streamer named Nick Rekieta.
So it's your testimony that Defendant's Exhibit 512 reflects damage to Penthouse 5 that occurred during the December 15th, 2015 incident. Yes?
I'm not quite sure from what incident this is when I see this photo in a vacuum without context.
Let's give you that context.
What?
Can we please, thanks. You can have day 16 trial testimony.
I mean, she's got the sledgehammer out and she's going to hammer down again that
Right.
I think that theme, everyone is lying. Everyone but me is lying.
Even the media, even the news
Everybody,
reports.
everybody.
And so I think what happened is that Aaron maneuvered his way into Nick Rekieta's life via proximity. They both live not too far away from each other in Minnesota, because he wanted to like leech off his cloud. I mean, that's my working theory. I think that it's probably pretty accurate, but Aaron Imholte really became an obsession of certain parts of the internet when this whole drama with him and Nick Rekieta kicked off after Nick Rekieta's house was raided by the cops, and Nick and his wife were arrested on drug felonies and other charges. And it slowly emerged that Aaron Imholte had dimed them off, and that Imholte and his wife at the time were in a polycule, or a multi-way relationship with Nick Rekieta and his wife, a foursome, if you will. Over the past year, there's been, I guess, like a drip feed of different revelations that have been coming out, mostly from Aaron, who is like soaking up all of the clout. He did like a little dirtbag media tour going on stream shows of ill repute, telling like all the intimate details in his account of the relationship between the Rekietas and the Imholtes.
Did you, in the course of any of this, did you ever like see Rekieta's wang?
I've seen it flaccid in passing.
Are you bigger than him?
I will say this. I will say it's close. I don't think I've seen it like firm.
And as if karma itself were watching Aaron Imholte, shortly thereafter, he got charged with felony revenge porn charges.
A local podcaster is now facing charges for something he allegedly did while live streaming his show. Aaron Imholte is the host of the Steel Toe Morning Show that has been on the air for at least a decade. Fox 9's Karen Scullin joins us now to explain what is happening here. Karen?
37-year-old Aaron Imholte made his first court appearance this morning for disseminating private sexual images without consent. But he appeared to do this while actually live streaming.
Because he transmitted live on his show, which is like almost where he always is, so how could it not have been, a nude photo of Nick Rekieta's wife. That's the allegation. The case is supposedly settling soon, but it's still pending, so nothing has been proved yet. But there is a clip out there you can watch of him quite obviously sending it to another guest on his show who's in another location and then commenting on the photo.
But one of Imholte's May shows has him in some legal trouble. He was reported for sending a photo of a naked woman that he knows to a person joining him on the podcast. That woman reported the situation to police, and now Imholte faces criminal charges.
Did you check? I like tattoos more than I think. Your boy didn't do too bad, did he?
Despite this growing jihad between Nick Rekieta and Aaron Imholte, and the fact that Aaron's life has objectively turned to crap since this whole thing kicked off, his wife that he was in the foursome with and married to at the time, Aaron's wife, subsequently left Aaron and moved in with the Rekietas to start a threesome rather than a foursome. Aaron's has become sort of like an evolving meme or locale on the internet, where I sort of think of him like that meme with the dog in the burning house, with the little bubble saying this is fine, but it's like the inferno that's surrounding him is growing more and more perilous. Well, the dog, or in this case, I guess Aaron, is telling us more and more vehemently that it's not actually a fire that you see surrounding him, burning him alive, but he's actually, I don't know, in a bubble bath or something like that. It's very strange to watch, and there's just a real interesting tension in wondering how this whole thing is going to resolve, because things just keep getting more and more strange and pathetic. It's not, I don't know, I guess normally I wouldn't have much of an angle into talking about the situation, but this week I was half listening to some clips of Aaron explaining that he had gotten into another legal drama, and there's been a number of them, and I don't want to recount them much beyond saying that he also had a charge for violating some type of protective order or restraining order from another ex-wife of his. I think he has 3 ex-wives, which not surprising, I guess. I think it's surprising the fact that he convinced 3 women to marry him, apparently, or at least 2. Anyway, whatever. He's been having a real spree of court cases I think he's almost 40 years old, and I don't know that he had ever really been in much legal jeopardy before, so it is an odd deal to suddenly become a serial whatever criminal of domestic violence restraining orders or whatever he's been involved in. But this latest issue is, and a lot of this I haven't seen the actual court paperwork for, other than some dockets that were posted on the internet, so I'm quite confident that this latest thing is true, because it doesn't make much sense for him to lie about it. But apparently he's been charged with the violating conditions of release on his revenge porn case. As I was listening to these clips earlier this week where he was talking about it and introducing the subject, it sort of almost inadvertently began to puzzle out in my mind what the reality of the situation actually was based on his garbled account, because he's obviously wanting to get ahead of this and try to make him, try to control the damage and control the narrative on what was happening. And it just so happens that this is one of the few areas of real speciality I have, because I worked as a paralegal for 10 years in criminal law on exactly the kind of legal minutia, the mechanics of how cases end up getting put on the docket and how all these different hearings go down. And so it was almost I couldn't help myself but to try to filter what he was saying from steel toe speak into what likely actually happened. And it was also very interesting because a lot of times when you're listening to a pathological liar, it can be difficult to know which way is up, because there's really no firm ground for you to plant your foot and pivot on. They're just either always lying or there's half truths. But for this, because I just knew the subject so well, I thought it gave me an insight into how he operates and how he sort of formulates his BS on the fly. And so I thought maybe there would be some glimmer of insight to be offered here. At first I was just sort of half listening to the clips while doing other stuff, but I actually went through and took notes, as is my wont. And so to me, it was a very interesting exercise, and I feel like I have peered into the abyss that is Aaron Imholte's brain. So there's two clips, one on the 18th and one on the 19th, where he explained to his audience. There's so much context here that's missing. I think a lot of people coming to this video will probably already know something about the Imholte situation, but I should explain that Imholte has like a pretty small audience. Like at one point he had more people watching his stream right after the drama happened like a year ago, but he has roughly, I think like something like maybe like 300 viewers during a morning live stream, which is good, but like, you know, if that's your job, it's not great. But anyways, because he has like such a small and like concentrated group of listeners, and a bunch of those 300 are people that are like trolling him or A-logging him, as they say, places like Kiwi Farms, you know, basically like people that hate him, hate watch him. The amount of people that actually are fans of his in the entire world is probably like sub 200 or something like that. So it's almost like there's a cult that's grown up around him of like diehard dead ender listeners. And so really like his show is like speaking to them. And it's also just very interesting thinking about how the way that his show is framed is like he just offers no context, and we'll get more into that when we listen to the clips. But it's like it's so interesting to think about like how somebody with no context would see this, like somebody that's not familiar with his show. And it's also interesting how it's like, again, representative of his self-destructive nature, because he's never going to get any new listeners if everything is like this weird inside baseball with, you know, half illusions and like things even like maybe his diehard listeners wouldn't pick up on. So it's just a very strange and devolving situation. And I thought it would be fun and interesting to go through the couple clips that he posted on the 18th and 19th. Both pretty short clips. I think each of them are around 5 minutes, and like maybe only half of each clip is like really relevant. So there's just like things that I wanted to say about like every 5 seconds, but I tried to limit myself to things that I actually felt were things that were like legal facts, or things that I could say with a pretty high degree of certainty were BS just based on my experience. Let's take a look at some clips. On the June 18th show, which was the evening show, and I think I mentioned this, but like this guy streams an incredible amount. I think it's like at least 4 hours every weekday morning, and then maybe another couple hours at night. And this one, the June 18th edition was a nighttime edition, which means that there's probably like half as many people listening. So a very tiny audience, and also probably his most hardcore fans, but I don't really know. I don't think I've ever watched an actual Steel Toe live stream. I'll get it secondhand through like clip channels, or he's very boring to watch if he's not mediated. But anyway, I just wanted to mention that for context, because this is like Aaron preaching to the choir here. But so Aaron starts off like talking about it as if it was like OJ telling you about the Bronco chase like right after it happened or something like that.
A lot of people fired up. What happened? Something happened? Sorry, was I supposed to come to you like that? I don't know.
He lives in this weird like Truman Show delusion where he thinks that his life is like front page news everywhere. And it's just, like I said, one minor reason why he's a shockingly bad broadcaster for somebody that's been his profession apparently for his entire life. What a violating condition of release charge is, or what, let's shorten it to VCOR, because that's what I referred to it as. That's how people generally refer to it. It's like when you're out on bail for a crime, you get like a bunch of conditions of release. Like you're not supposed to commit new crimes. You're not supposed to, contact the victim if there's a victim in the case. You're not supposed to drink alcohol in some cases. Whatever it is, if you're caught violating your conditions of release, you get a new case. And it's a distinct criminal charge called a violating conditions of release charge. It's usually like a very minor criminal charge. In my state, it's the lowest level. It's like a Class B misdemeanor, but it's still a criminal charge and could carry potential jail sentence. The way that Aaron frames this is that he immediately starts referring to it as a lawfare, which is, I guess, another tick of Aaron's is that he likes to adopt sort of buzzy phrases and apply them to himself, even if they're wildly off base in this case. And this is just like a very typical and interesting framing from Aaron, because if you don't think about it for more than like 2 seconds, you're like, yeah, well, what, calling it lawfare, he's just talking out of his ass, I guess, if you're skeptical of him. But if you do sort of spend a couple seconds thinking about it, you realize that like what lawfare is the state or, some sort of government or some sort of entity that has some sort of franchise of power is the one that's persecuting you, not a complaining witness or a victim. So what Aaron is doing here by saying that is he's imputing a sort of motive on the prosecutor and basically saying that they're crooked, right? And so one of the more interesting things for me as a viewer watching these clips is to see the tiny hamster wheel in Aaron's brain churning when he starts to realize that he's just like stepped in it in his sort of midstream of consciousness rambling. Another thing that's been revealed about Aaron recently is there's a great show called Who Are These Podcasts, where I first became familiar with Aaron, and they review terrible podcasts. So, of course, Aaron, the Steel Toe Show, is a natural fit. And there's a really brilliant tech guy that is a frequent guest and co-host on the show. He like created some sort of like script program that like monitored how often Aaron Imholte's account was visiting the Kiwi farms. And so using that data as a proxy, they were able to determine that Aaron like barely sleeps like 2 or 3 hours a night.
So I wrote a script, like it's 20 lines of code, very small, that every 5 minutes checked when was the last time Aaron checked in onto Kiwi farms.
Wow. Okay.
And I've charted this out. So what I'm going to present is a timeline over the course of, how many is that? 9 days. This is perhaps the most complicated graph we've done on this show. But yeah, feel free to share that. Here we go. Let's
There's
dig in.
a lot to break down here, but basically
break this down.
What this has given us is basically a map of Aaron Imholte's life.
It really sort of made a lot of sense to me because, you know, he drinks these like super high octane energy drinks called Celsius that are apparently like insane. And, you know, I think he's like sort of having like an extended like manic break, broadcasting for like way more hours a day than any human should. And so, you know, he's like barely sleeping, barely thinking, and he's just sort of saying the first thing that comes to his mind. But eventually like his lizard brain or whatever kicks in and he starts to have some flicker of self-preservation instinct. And what he's obviously trying to do by calling it lawfare is say that like the Rekietas are enacting lawfare against him, but that just doesn't follow. It's not possible because that's not what lawfare is. It's not some other party in the public. He starts to walk it back and sort of like backfill, which is a term that I think is great that comes from psychology, where like somebody who is a narcissist or a liar will retroactively try to change their story by like subtly altering it. And that's something that Aaron does all the time. So as we get further into it, about 30 seconds in, Aaron's talking about more about these lawfare tactics and people. He's saying, you know, people are cutting things together, which by which I assume that he means like cutting together video clips of him talking on stream.
Just more stupid lawfare horse shit. That's all it is. I mean, I'm used to it. It's been happening for almost a year now. Just people cutting stuff together, putting it together, spinning it. It's like...
Again, I don't think he realizes the implication of what he's saying, because I don't think he really has any sort of knowledge about how the real world or the legal system, for that matter, works. But what he's basically saying here is that the implication is that the prosecutor is like taking clips from people on, I don't know, Kiwi farms or from wherever on the internet. Like they're receiving these clips from these people and then not doing any sort of due diligence, not following up on it and investigating to see what the basis for this is and if it's accurate. It's basically just saying that the prosecutor in the entire system is not doing its job by saying that. Because like even, you know, it's like since I've worked on like thousands of different criminal cases, and it's like in every criminal case where there's a victim, there's an opportunity for there to be somebody with bias providing you information. And basically everyone has a bias, and especially when they're the victim of a crime. So prosecutors' offices are very familiar with evaluating claims from different parties and looking at stuff like video evidence and following up on it, trying to establish stuff like chains of custody. And, you know, they have to do that stuff to bring a charge. I think I mentioned this briefly before, but I mean, like, he's still pre-sentence. What his main claim is that there's this like sweetheart plea agreement that he's already reached with the prosecutor. And so this is not going to be a problem at all. And he's got nothing to worry about basically, but it's like, we'll get more to that, but later, but yeah, he's so not out of the woods yet. And so even making all of these statements about the nature of this charge and lawfare, I mean, it can only serve to put you in potential future legal jeopardy if if it gets back to the prosecutor or the judge. They're going to be pissed off that you're basically saying they're involved in a huge conspiracy against you. I guess I don't know how much deep I want to even go into this, but I mean, like, there are statutes against like vindictive prosecution, but it's very difficult to prove. And even when prosecutors do things that are easy to interpret as being vindictive to defendants, going after a case even when it should have been apparent that they're innocent, or it happens sometimes in wrongful conviction cases, it just never happens. And so that the prosecutors get charged or punished by the vindictive prosecution law. So it's just it's just dumb on like 10 different levels that Aaron is making this claim, I think, without even really understanding it. And we'll get some more evidence of that later when he really starts to realize how much he stepped in it. So about 40 seconds in, and I'm trying not to like stop these clips too often, but like this first part, there's just so much gish galloping going on, just so many different claims coming out of Aaron's mouth at once that it becomes hard to parse, because I could be stopping it like every 2 seconds to talk about it. But anyway, Aaron here just basically flatly claims that he did not violate his conditions of release.
Have I ever violated my conditions of release? No.
Which obviously is not something that he's able to determine. It's out of his hands. And then Aaron goes on a jag about how his conditions of release are over on Wednesday, so apparently that makes it irrelevant, or that it doesn't matter.
Are we contesting this one? I mean, as much as you can. I mean, my release is over on Wednesday, and the hearing is Wednesday, and it's just a little bit before my sentencing, so...
Which is crazy, because it's like he's saying that because he's only got whatever it is, a few days left, a week on his conditions of release, that they shouldn't be enforced any longer because it's close to their expiration. I mean, I don't know how else you'd interpret what he's saying here, but just in my experience, and it makes a lot of sense when you just think about human nature. I can't tell you how many cases I worked on where defendants get jammed up on violations right at the end of the term of their conditions of release or conditions of probation. It happens even more often because that's when somebody checks the file if they're working at a probation office or whatever. It's just when the expiration of these things come up, it's just a natural ping for the people monitoring these cases to check and look and see, oh, well, I guess he did get another criminal case or something like that. So he's got a new charge because he got a criminal case while on conditions of release for his old one, whatever. And it's also doubly irrelevant because even if we're to assume that Aaron's plea hearing were to go through and that the judge were to accept his plea agreement, it's given a certainty basically that as part of his probation conditions, Aaron would have the same or very similar restrictions against contacting the victim or talking about the victim, which is what I think and what I've seen the internet say is the basis for this conditions of release violation. I guess I should have explained that earlier, but it's not entirely clear. But the gist that I'm getting is that Aaron has been talking about Nick Rekieta's wife on his show. And again, I'm not entirely certain of it, but it's almost immaterial to what we're talking about because it doesn't matter what the violation is. Their conditions of release charges are very cut and dry. It's like different in that way than almost any other legal charge, which has a lot of different elements of the offense, but it's like basically only one step in determining conditions of release. It's like, did you have a conditions of release? Did you violate it? All right, well, you're guilty. I guess what I'm saying is like Aaron's contention that his conditions are going to be over so soon doesn't matter, because even if we assume we time warp into the future and Aaron were to have committed the violation, then it would be a violation of his conditions of probation instead of conditions of release, which has some different mechanics, but I mean, it would be essentially the same result. He would just have a petition to revoke filed instead of a new charge, but he could get all or some of his time and fines and other suspended parts of his sentence in his underlying case imposed because he violated then, but it's just immaterial. The point is that regardless, conditions of release and probation terms generally mirror one another because they're based on the same underlying conduct or case. So I'm just gonna skip ahead a little bit here to 1 minute and 20 seconds in. And the last like 30 or 40 seconds of this Aaron talking about this are very incoherent. Talking about his attorney, and you can just see him sort of like jumping around from one thought to another, like a squirrel zigzagging in traffic.
My attorney just said, can we deal with it? Like, this is lawfare. This is people just like, it's been constant. Like, even the prosecutor in this case has said, it's like people are just every single day, just trying. And look, I get it. I'm a public figure. I piss a lot of people off with the show I do.
Basically, Aaron's saying that his attorney agrees with him about this being lawfare, and there's been many instances in the past where Aaron recreates what are obviously fake conversations between him and another person, and it's just very strange. You can see like Aaron creating his own reality in his head and it evolving. What Aaron says, the most important part here about his conversation with his attorney, is that the court and his attorney talked and agreed to add the violation to in the upcoming hearing, apparently the plea agreement hearing.
I talked to my attorney today. He said, let's just deal with this on Wednesday. The judge said, yeah, we'll deal with this on Wednesday.
To me, this is a perfect example of a obviously contradictory and strained claim that he's making, because it's basically saying, Aaron's saying that his attorney, his defense attorney, and the clerk of courts, or whoever's handling the calendar in his district, had the final authority on how and when to handle a new criminal case and how it's calendared, which is just impossible. It's just not how things work. I mean, it would be a violation of one of the most like sort of central tenets of criminal law, and that you can't make a decision in a criminal case excluding one of the parties. It's referred to as ex parte communication, because he doesn't mention the prosecutor's office at all and what their say was in the whole deal. By statute, the prosecutor's office is in charge of like filing charges, and they're the final authority. The courts have no say in how and when cases get charged. They may have some say into like the technical logistics of how it gets on the calendar, but Aaron was saying it's just a total non sequitur. And I think what more accurately happened, based on my reading of Toe Speaker, my interpretation of his garbled retelling of his conversation with his defense attorney, is that what probably happened is either the prosecutor's office filed a new VCOR charge, violating conditions of release, and contacted Aaron's attorney and agreed to calendar it along with his existing case at the change of plea, negotiated that rather than filing it with like a warrant where Aaron could get picked up by the police. This sort of scenario does happen quite often. Like if a defendant has a change of plea hearing, which I don't even think we really know if that's true. It's like, again, you just never really know with this guy. I just don't think I've ever actually seen that happen in thousands of cases, just because it's terribly inefficient with the court's time. It also is sort of not taking into account that the final authority for a plea agreement is not the prosecutor, it's not the defense attorney, it's the judge. And so that's why the plea hearing happens, and that's why the judge goes through all of the parts of the plea, make sure that the defendant understands them, and the defendant's in not under duress or under the influence of any drugs or alcohol, and evaluates whether or not the judge finds the plea to be lawful and fair and correct. And for any reason, the judge can reject the plea and just say, no, this isn't going to happen. And so if there were to be some weirdo scenario where Aaron's defense attorney, his based defense attorney, were to pull the wool over the prosecutor's eyes and get Aaron some deal that is out of this world great, that's why the system is set up the way that it is, and why it has all these different layers in place to stop this sort of abuse of the system. It would just be, again, very foolish for Aaron to gloat over this at this point, because even if somehow by dint of crazy luck his original plea agreement was still going to go through and there were to be no consequences for him getting a new case, there's still another big hurdle to clear. And it doesn't happen very often that judges reject a plea, but this would be the type of thing that would receive some scrutiny, I think it's fair to say. And one thing I want to come back to, I mentioned briefly earlier, is Aaron's representing this new charge as something that he can basically disregard, or that his attorney told him that it's not even worth worrying about because they're going to contest it, he says. These are much more cut and dried cases. There's really nothing like the elements of the offense in a VCOR charge as there is in almost any other underlying case that you can think of. And so what he seems to be saying at the same time is that the prosecutor's filing this new charge, but it's already been determined that it's not an issue and will in all likelihood be dismissed at the first appearance. But then he's also saying that this violating conditions of release has been filed as part of a lawfare conspiracy. So it's both a non-issue out of the gate and part of some sort of grand conspiracy to punish Aaron for offending people on the radio, the 300 people that listen to him. It's just a really good example of how Aaron always wants to have it both ways. Like, he wants to play both the victim and the hero simultaneously, and it ends up in obviously very strained logical situations like this where it's just a non sequitur machine. So 2 minutes in, Aaron says that after the sentencing on Wednesday, he'll be all done with the case. Even if we accept everything that Aaron says, which is obviously not true, Aaron, like I said, will again have probation and suspended time and all this stuff to deal with.
So everything's still the same way it was. We're going in on Wednesday. We get the sentencing. We'll be all done with this shit.
2:30, Aaron again imputes the prosecutor's motives here. This was always about vengeance and never about justice.
Wednesday, like it always was. It's stupid, but it does further show that this, while I may have done something I wasn't supposed to do, this was always about vengeance, and this was never about justice.
And those little turns of phrases, sometimes it's like, yeah, he probably wrote that down on like a napkin or something. There's every once in a while where he's like, wow, I wonder if he put a prompt into Chat GPT or something for that one. It's just a childish way of understanding the criminal justice system in the world. Not everyone's out to get you. And even if there was a witness that was victim that was highly motivated to get you prosecuted for something, like, the prosecutor is not just going to accept some other person's word. If it's a crime, it's a crime. It doesn't matter where the initial complaint came from. The police generally operate in the same sort of way, and prosecutors do too. And like I said, there's many different layers to the system to prevent that sort of abuse, but Aaron is just not even taking that into account. And furthermore, either knowingly or unknowingly saying that they're part of this conspiracy and potentially pissing them off when he's at their mercy, essentially. And again, having worked on all these different cases from both sides, I worked both in the defense, public defender's office, and in a prosecutor's office. Everybody knows that no witness or victim comes to a case in a vacuum, and so that's the job, is evaluating people with biases, or you're just never going to have a victim of a crime or somebody that's completely neutral involved in a case. It's just human nature. So yeah, it's also why we have a jury trial with 12 unrelated parties being impaneled to decide a case. And so yeah, Aaron's basically saying that all of these different layers, the prosecutor, the judge, a potential jury, his attorney, are all ineffectual and not exerting any real influence on the case. The real revelation here in this clip for me, at 2:35, Aaron admits that he is guilty of the underlying revenge porn case. He says, I did what I did 100%, and kind of goes on from there, making more comments about it, which is just incredibly foolish. As I mentioned, he's not out of the woods yet. Even if he thinks he has it in the bag, something could happen. It could fall through. The judge could reject it. There's a million different reasons why, while your case is still pending, you don't want to admit to the factual basis of it.
Two things can be true at the same time. I did what I did 100%. But if you don't think this was about getting me rather than, enforce, we just want what's right. Or was it about, let's get Aaron?
Especially if there's also a new charge in the works right before the hearing, because that could easily throw things haywire. So now, the point in this, in my sort of thinking in why this is so dumb, is like, from the prosecutor's perspective, the case against Aaron, for the revenge porn case, was sort of tentative. There were some witnesses in another state that didn't want to appear, and you also have to sort of deal with all the phone metadata, and it's just a huge pain in the ass to go to jury trials, which is why the whole system is geared to avoid them. Yeah, it's just a lot of things making it that case like something that a prosecutor would look at side-eyed and think like, I don't know if this is like such a slam dunk case, because even though he did it live on stream and even though he's super unlikable, there's just all these uncertainties involved. But if you now have this guy admitting to it, it's like, well, then all this other stuff doesn't really come into play. You've got an admission. And, that's just sort of icing on the cake or sort of secondary, and you can pick and choose some garnish if you're going to go to... this is what takes a case from attorney wanting to avoid it to an attorney like lapping it up, because it also has some potential media pop in the local market, especially because this has already been reported on a number of times. This is exactly the sort of thing that you don't want to do while you're awaiting a case, even if you think that you've got the whole thing like double locked up. It's just really, really dumb, and there's no reason for it. It's like, what sort of crumb of self-dignity is he preserving by like sort of wrapping himself into a pretzel? 2 minutes and 50 seconds in, Aaron starts to realize that all of his arguments have a problem, and that they all appear to include the prosecution in this grand conspiracy of lawfare, as I mentioned.
Not on the state side. But that's what this violation nonsense that we're contesting is. It's the same thing. It's let's get him. Because I've never violated this whole time. I've been extremely careful. Everybody knows that. But
so here's where we see his wheels really start to turn. He starts to try to paper over the flaming wreckage that he's just caused by saying, the case was all about, once again, says something about how, to the effect of like, the case was all about getting me, Aaron, rather than justice. But it wasn't that way on the state side. He's like, oh shit. He just sort of realizes, I think, to the degree which he's stepped in it, and to, how, I don't think he often sort of like thinks outside of himself. I think he has like a, very little theory of mind and sort of understanding how other people might interpret things. But for whatever reason, it sort of clicks on here. He clues in that like, yeah, I probably shouldn't say that the state is trying to out to get me, or at least implying it or saying things in a way where it could be easily interpreted that's what you're alleging. Again, this is like a night show to like 100 diehard dead-enders and or A-loggers or people that are just watching him because he's a lolcout and they hate him. So it's like there's no real clout to be gained here. It's just stupid. It's just he's trying to save face, I think. I don't, how do you interpret the actions of a totally crazy person? 3:45 into the clip, Aaron is running out of steam and probably wanting to move off this topic because he's, again, sort of realizing that some sort of self-preservation thing is flickering on in the recesses of his lizard brain. But he then somehow, while sort of trying to transition from that, discovers to step into yet another larger pile of shit. And one of Aaron's really annoying ticks, and another reason why he sucks at broadcasting, is he's always looking at the chat. Everybody in the chat is talking shit about who I presume to be, the victims, in this case probably Kayla and Nick Rekieta.
And we'll be all good. That'll be nice. Let's go ahead. I know a lot of people in the chat are calling, they're saying, that they're insulting people. I know. We all know what it is. It's lawfare. It's the whole thing.
It just doesn't look good if a judge sees this. And again, I'm thinking about this from the perspective of the court or an attorney. This is exactly the sort of thing that would like freak them out or incense them, because they see this as like a part of a pattern of conduct, and he's violated, like I said, a couple of other restraining orders and has a recent conviction for violating restraining orders. So it's like you're disregarding their orders, which they hate, but then they can see demonstrated in this clip that you're also inciting other people to do the same thing, to shit talk the victims. And so it's just, I can just imagine how this would piss off a judge. And I think the one thing that's like sort of working in his favor is that, again, nobody's really watching it, although I'm sure the authorities are at least keeping tabs on it. But also it's just so, again, such an impenetrable, weird rabbit hole that if you're not deep in it, how would like some 60-year-old judge see this clip with no context and like be able to make heads or tails of it. And I can barely do it, and I'm pretty familiar with the subject and also have some experience in the law. At 4 minutes in, Aaron says this whole VCOR thing, this whole new charge violating conditions release, just gets a big eye roll from him, which is like the stereotypical thing that a defendant at a change of plea hearing will do that'll get him a long prison sentence because it pisses off the judge.
It gets a big eye roll from me.
The next day, I believe it was the morning show on the 19th, Aaron ended up doing like another few-minute segment about this whole VCOR situation, and he introduces the topic by saying that he needs to make a correction, which to me is like a great sign that somebody got to him, or like somebody questioned him in his, I don't know, wherever on Kiwi Farms or his inner circle, and so now he needs to like move the goalpost or sort of backfill again. The thing that he needs to correct is that there's not actually going to be a hearing for the VCOR. He says, I was wrong about that.
Which reminds me, I do have to correct one thing real quick. So last night when I was addressing the bullshit, bogus, lawfare violation report thing, which we have a chance to, speak our piece about and contest it, and we are, they can't take any action on it until we have had our hearing. It doesn't sound like there's even going to be a hearing. I was wrong about that yesterday. It's not been given its own time.
That was like the whole point of his spiel the night before, was that his based great lawyer did him a huge solid and got it put on the calendar. I don't know. One is left to wonder if Aaron's so bad at relaying a detail this significant to the story from a conversation with his lawyer, can you really rely on anything that goes through this steel toe filter? Is it just already sounding like a titanic pile of bullshit? 1:15 into the clip, Aaron says that the VCOR isn't going to be giving its own hearing time, but it's going to be addressed at the change of plea hearing. So pretty much what I described typically happens when related cases are settled all together. But this is like, to me, like a distinction without a difference. Like, what difference does it make that it's not going to be on the hearing calendar, but it's going to be addressed at the hearing? Like, what does that even mean? Like, how does that change in any way the situation? It just leads me to believe that the issue involves like something like what's actually on the court calendar, or I don't know, something that somebody found where Aaron needs to have something where he's like, technically, I don't know. I'm just sort of baffled at this point because it doesn't even make sense. It's just bizarre what he's trying to say. And so then another 15 seconds on at 1:30, Aaron says that he thought the plan was to go into court and say, this is a new charge and it's lawfare. And I'm interpreting this a little bit, but I think this is what Aaron said his attorney was going to say on his behalf, because I don't think Aaron would be saying this in court unless he's like in some sort of fever fantasy dream where he's, acting as his own lawyer and, bringing down City Hall or whatever. And his lawyer is going to say, this is lawfare and it's just from clippers and people presenting stuff out of context, which again, ignorant beyond belief, because he's saying that the prosecutors and the courts and everybody else is all asleep at the wheel and not evaluating evidence.
It wasn't the worst deal in the world. We were just going to go there and be like, this is bullshit. This is clearly just lawfare. This is people clipping shit out of context, throwing it in every day, throwing shit against the wall, seeing what sticks.
Police and prosecutors are quite familiar with the process of evaluating evidence, and they don't just take whatever a member of the public hands them and run with it unless they verify it. But another reason why I know that Aaron is full of shit here is that you would never mount a defense and make these sort of statements at your initial appearance. It's just not what the purpose of a appearance or arraignment is. It's not set up to give you that time to do that in front of the court. It's just for an initial plea and some logistical things. And people plead not guilty at an initial appearance with very few exceptions, because it just means that they, want to have a lawyer evaluate their case and not settle it right then. I mean, I don't know that I've ever seen somebody plead guilty at an arraignment without first negotiating it with counsel involved. Like sometimes people can get ahead of a case and come in on the first appearance and settle it, but it's not when there's a felony involved, and it's just the logistics of it don't make sense in terms of the way the court operates. And what you do at initial appearance is you figure out if you need an attorney, or if you can't afford one, if you get one appointed. You schedule dates so that roughly the timeline of how this case is going to operate. You determine bail, like if it's going to cost you money to be released from jail if you go to jail, and also your conditions of release, which we've talked about, and so on and so forth. Just all the different particulars of what's going to happen with your case. And so that's what it's set up to do, and usually it takes like 5 minutes or less for that to happen. But what Aaron's talking about is something out of a movie where his attorney's going to be like Matlock and go in there and make an argument. Well, you can't do that unilaterally because the prosecutor doesn't know that that's going to happen, I'm assuming. And it just doesn't make sense. It's just crazy. And I mean, so it's funny because sometimes people do try to do this at arraignments, but they're usually coming out of the drunk tank and don't really get where they are and just want to, I don't know, argue or something like that. But the other thing is the judge will immediately cut you off if you start talking about the facts of your case whatsoever. Lots of times it can be like a magistrate, or it just is not set up for that, and it's not the venue for that. And even if you tried to make it the venue for that, you'd basically just get kicked out, because it just creates all sorts of potential legal issues with you not having proper counsel and not going through all the hoops, which is what legal people love. And so you try to just bust through the hoops, they're not a fan of that. It's a legal non sequitur. Again, it does not follow. 1 minute 45, though, it just gets weirder and weirder. I had assumed that Aaron said he was wrong about the hearing because he misinterpreted the conversation that he had with his lawyer. This is one thing, I guess, that we'll all learn about assuming with Aaron is you just can't do it. And here he says that he realized there wasn't a hearing when he looked at his paperwork again.
I looked at the paperwork again. It's all part of sentencing. So, my attorney handled it brilliantly. Todd's the fucking Maze based. He's great.
As if this wasn't baffling enough bullshit. It's like, so you didn't talk to your attorney, or this didn't come up? Like, you have a hearing in a few days. That wasn't part of the conversation you had in preparation for that. It was because you took a second look at your paperwork and didn't see a hearing date? Wouldn't you then have some sort of part of the story about how I called my attorney because I was sure that I had a hearing, but I didn't see it on this. You would just not see a hearing date and be like, oh, I guess I don't have a hearing. I don't know why I thought that. It's like, what basis did you have for assuming that you had a hearing then? Did it appear as like a mirage on your paperwork, and that it's like, were you hallucinating? It's fucking weird. I don't even understand how anybody is an actual listener or fan of his. I'm not even really sure there are, but it's just this sort of thing that makes me wonder, is this guy literally going crazy in front of my eyes? But I don't know. This leads me to believe that somebody online pointed out that he was full of shit for XYZ reason, and now he's trying to backfill his previous line of bullshit to somehow make his story plausible. But it's like he's, again, bending himself into an especially fucked up pretzel. So yeah, 2 minutes into the clip, he says, I'm just so puzzled by this whole spiel. I don't even know what his goal is or what he's getting at. And so even again, it's just so strange to think about somebody like a member of the public coming into this cold. But now, so he says something like crisis averted. Yesterday I was thinking that this was a bigger deal than it was, but I guess now that he realized that he didn't have a hearing date, he also somehow was magically able to ascertain from that one fact that it's not a big deal. But it's like, crisis averted. I thought it was a bigger deal yesterday. Well, based on what he said on yesterday's show, it's like I didn't get that impression at all. Like it was a crisis. He basically seemed to brush it off.
Crisis averted for yesterday. I was thinking that was a bigger deal than it was.
So it's like he's basically telling you in so many words that he was bullshitting you yesterday, but what he's telling you today is apparently accurate. And 2:30, and I'm just sort of throwing up my hands at this point because Aaron So something about how his conditions, again, about how his conditions of release are ending on Wednesday, so it wouldn't make sense to modify or change them after that.
Well, because conditions of release after Wednesday, there's no more release. It's done. It's sentenced. It's pled out. So it wouldn't really make any sense that the conditions of release would be modified or changed because of this thing, because there will be no more conditions of release.
And it's like I listen to this like a few different times because I'm trying to figure out, like, is he saying that the whole point of the violating conditions of release is simply to modify his conditions for the remaining few days? Or is he like not understanding how time space works? It's like, reminds me of the scene, I don't know if you guys are Trek nerds like I am, but in DS9 there's like a few scenes in later seasons where the main character, Captain Sisko, is like talking to these like wormhole aliens, and they're like trying to explain to each other like linear time and non-linear time.
Experiences. What is this?
Memories. Events from my past, like this one.
Past?
Things that happened before now. You have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about.
What comes before now is no different than what is now, or what is to come. It is one's existence.
Then for you, there is no linear time.
Is this guy is he like unmoored from his place in our reality and like somehow traveling through a wormhole into non-linear time? Because that would be one reason why this might make sense, I guess. Conditions of release are usually also like from some time ago. So like even if they were just coming up now and you only have a few days left in your probation, again, your probation doesn't, or your conditions don't end until they end. They're in force until the moment they're not. But also like there's always a lag time, right? So of course they're going to be from some time ago, the allegations. And I'm struggling at this point to even figure out what the fuck this guy is saying. Yeah, and it's, I don't know, both riveting and frustrating trying to make sense of it. Yeah, and then he also mentions his probation here, which I think he mentions because he knows people will bring up that, like, yeah, you'll also have conditions on probation. So he's either like doesn't understand how probation works and that he'll have like the same type of conditions on probation, or he's like feigning that he doesn't have probation. But again, this waffling bullshit is just doubly irrelevant, at least. Yeah, I'm just gonna do a couple more here because again, I think we're sort of again sort of staring into the darkness here. But 248, I'm trying to let a lot of the obvious BS go and just picking out the parts where I know factually what Aaron is saying is a lie because of how the law works. But here he says again that his based lawyer talked to the judge and requested a hearing on the VCOR charge, and the judge said, we don't even need a hearing before sentencing. We'll just make it part of the sentencing. So, again, impossible because the judge doesn't have that authority. It's not the court's role. The prosecutor's the one to decide this by statute. And why would the judge be cutting deals unilaterally? Again, trying to interpret this, it just sounds to me like this new charge got rolled into a new agreement and had to rip up the old plea agreement, which again is provisional until the judge signs off. But it's like Aaron trying to say that like this isn't a big deal, it's not affecting his underlying case. It's just doubly bullshit once again. And that's all for the legal bullshittery that I'm going to cover in this video. But yeah, I realized in doing this exercise that clip from the 19th especially is like a microcosm from Aaron's show, because the clip is only about 5.5 minutes long. But it starts and ends with Aaron telling a fake story about what he calls the goal, which is the framing device Aaron uses to beg for money from his audience. He sets like a specific dollar amount each day that he wants in tips from his pay pigs. And I didn't even mention this in any other part of the video, the goal, or, that most of his show really does revolve around the goal because it wasn't germane to the legal stuff. But it's like, it really is the point of his show, is manipulating his audience and finding a way to extract money from them. Because you know, the dollar amount keeps changing, and it's obviously like he's trying to gamify it by pitting it, his audience like as an us versus them type of thing. And he even has like people, I can't remember what this person's name is, but there's one guy who's like his foil that always posts in the chat, you know, basically like his nemesis. And so Aaron has all these different like little tricks that he plays where, you know, sports metaphors, like, let's do this team. And to me, it's really sort of reminiscent of the way that like a cult operates. Like, you can't really have a cult unless you have a force coming at you from outside that galvanizes everybody. And so it's, I don't think Aaron realizes this intellectually, but just whatever reason, like sort of animal instinct, he's picked up on a lot of these different things and operates like a you know, whatever, like a human pachinko machine that is just trying to find like new ways by instinct or however to find gullible idiots that'll give him money and to separate them from it. So like this whole clip, it starts with him talking about, you know, how this fake story about like the goal and how it's been really great to have like a goal-free week, you know, because like normally it's a dollar amount. Apparently there hadn't been a dollar amount because he'd received more donations earlier. I don't even know, but even that's a lie because there is like a $200 goal on the very show that he's saying this on. And it just reminds me, like, there's so many parallels, too many to ignore, to the video game streamer known as Darkside Phil, who's like also like an infamous lolcow. Both of them e-beg constantly. They both are totally inveterate liars. And my impression of like their actual reality is that they both live in this hell of a spiraling series of delusions, you know, and escalating delusions of grandeur, or like they are both trying to hide whatever dark secrets they have. And if you read on the internet about these guys, you'll find out more about what their dark secrets are, but they're the most pathetic things you can imagine. Like, Aaron's into cuck porn, and Darkside Phil spends thousands of dollars a month on a WWE themed Candy Crush type game. I don't even know what the fuck it is, but yeah, it's just, they're both very sad individuals. I think, again, putting a mask on to hide whatever it is that pains them. But the story Aaron uses to like sandwich the anecdote about his court case about the goal is like the perfect example of how this guy operates in a blizzard of lies, to the point that the summary of the story is that he hasn't been doing this goals this week. Again, lying about that fact because he's obviously doing a goal as he's speaking, or has put a goal out, is soliciting money from his audience, and then goes into his whole waffle about the you know, his whole spiel, his whole propaganda or spin on the conditions of release story that goes on for a few minutes. So the clip's like 1 minute of like the first part of the goal story, a few minutes of like him spinning the VCOR thing, or like back spinning it because he's sort of walking back or backfilling what he said the day before. And then at the end, it's like him saying, you know, what have my viewers have actually been contacting me saying that they miss the goal, like they love the goal, and it hasn't been here this week. Like they want the goal back. I mean, that's where all the tension and all the drama, seeing if we're gonna hit the goal, you know. So it's like you couldn't be like a more obvious gaslighter. And I think that's sort of the point, is that the people that are still in Aaron's audience are sort of like self-selected for being the exact type of people that would fall victim to Aaron's BS. And so in a sense, it's like almost like a predator-prey type relationship that's just, I don't know. It's like, how does a con man find his victims? And, you know, it's the other thing to mention, like just in terms of how many layers of fakery and lies there are, is like, I don't even think that he actually reaches his goal. Like, I think he lies about how much money he gets because, like I said, he solicits like a $300 goal for each show, or like $200 for the night show. But like I said, he only has like 300 live viewers. So if you think of the conversion rate of that, it's fucking insane. Like, even like titty streamers or whatever don't come close to that. I'm sure it's like orders of magnitude off. Like, he probably wouldn't get that many super tips if he had 3,000 live viewers. It's just not credible. And there's lots of evidence, you know, that he always gets like these last minute goals that he have like weird names or aren't verifiable. And it's just such an interesting combination, the Steel Toe Show, of both being at times riveting, but at times most of the time, and totally inane. Like, I could never watch his stream live for more than a few minutes because, like I said, he's an objectively terrible broadcaster. He's got the most grating, schlocky fake radio voice you can imagine. And the entire show is about, again, the goal, soliciting money. So it's like watching a pledge drive, 5 days a week. There's no context or skill to the way that the show is set up. There's no regular topics, no bits. He doesn't even have co-hosts anymore because they've all abandoned him. It's just, the whole show is the drizzling shits, as they would say in pro wrestling. But I think the really interesting thing about the community that's evolved in around him to just sort of observe what's happening is that there are these great clip channels like So Thorough Joe Burrow and Stalin 19 and Doom and a number of others who have created like a real art form out of sifting through the rivers of bullshit to find these little specks of gold and assemble them in a coherent way. And so, yeah, really appreciate you guys, and keep feeding me more toe clips, because it's starting to get really interesting, and I hope some or all of this made sense. It's been a wild ride.